Imagine for a second that the entirety of the country of Mexico was completely devoid of its human population, sans 0.05% of people, and its land area increased by about 10%. Now imagine that it was an island just north of Canada and it's cold. Very, very cold. Welcome to Greenland, over 2 million square kilometers of tundra, ice, and small stretches of inhabitable land where the island's 60,000 residents live, and despite the region's currently minuscule population, Greenland, or Kalalit Nunaat as it's known in its native tongue, has one of the more ancient and interesting histories of any region in the Americas. Now, notice how I'm not referring to Greenland as a country in this video because technically it's still a part of the Kingdom of Denmark, the relatively small northern European country over 3,000 kilometers away, in a similar fashion to how the Netherlands, France, and the United Kingdom still own several overseas possessions all over the world, which may or may not be completely integrated with their respective countries. In the case of Greenland, before 1979, they were formerly heavily integrated with Denmark proper in Europe, even being a part of the European Union, or European Economic Community as it was known at the time. However, following January of 1979, a referendum was held in Greenland which resulted in far greater autonomy in the region, establishing their own parliament, education, and healthcare, and ever since then, many in Greenland have been pushing for even further autonomy and eventual independence. But at the moment, for all intents and purposes, Greenland is still very much a part of Denmark. But why is this the case, and when did it start? It's earlier than you probably thought, but let's go ahead and discuss some of the history of Greenland prior to European contact. The native inhabitants of the island can be classified as Inuits, divided between the Kalalit, Tunamit, and Inuktun tribes, who are a Native American group that actually arrived in a separate later migration to the northern fringes of the continent and are generally fairer skinned, a bit shorter, and have facial features more similar to Northeast Asians when compared to Amerindian groups to their south. The Inuit, who have been colloquially referred to as Eskimos, a term some might find offensive, are a group of closely related people groups in the Arctic Circle region of North America, including the northern tip of Quebec, Nunavut, the Northwest Territories, and Yukon of Canada, along with the northern coast of the U.S. state of Alaska. Even though the many Inuit dialects may or may not be mutually intelligible with each other, the Inuit people are generally considered to be the same ethnic group in most censuses, and although they inhabit a truly vast and expansive territory, stretching from Alaska to Greenland, being far larger than the homeland for nearly any other ethnic group on the planet, they currently number less than 150,000 people, including those that are mixed with a non-Inuit tribe or European, which we'll elaborate on later. Groups loosely related to the Inuits who arrived in the same wave of migration across the Bering Strait from Siberia include the Yupik and Aleutian peoples of Alaska, and are even more distantly related genetically to the Tlingit, Navajo, and even the Apache. Greenland has a very ancient history connected with North American peoples, with the first Amerindians arriving from North America at most 4,500 years ago, whose ancestors had recently migrated from Siberia, so they were genetically adapted to fit in the freezing conditions of the Arctic Circle. These peoples are not the ancestors of the modern Greenlandic Inuits, however, as they died off around 800 BC, a trend you'll find is very common among this desolate stretch of land. The Dorset people were the next group that migrated from the mainland of North America, and they lasted around 2,000 years, starting around 500 BC, but alas, they also met their end in the region, inhabiting the far northwest corner of Greenland, nearest to Ellesmere Island in Canada. Now, as these different cultures and peoples were rising and falling in this frozen corner of the globe, something much larger was brewing across the pond in the Old World, with the Kingdom of Egypt, the Greeks, Romans, and Mongol empires all having their heyday during this time period, but it was around the 8th century AD that the people group commonly known as the Vikings, who for the most part were hardly united or organized, began to spread from the Scandinavian peninsula, raiding, pillaging, trading, and doing what Vikings are best known for. The Vikings were Germanic peoples who were great seafarers traveling to and raiding the Russians, Byzantines, but especially the area directly adjacent to them, such as the British Isles, Germany, and the Netherlands. They first settled the Shetland and Orkney Islands off the coast of northern Scotland in small numbers, before arriving in the Faroe Islands around 800 AD, which was uninhabited at the time and located about halfway between Scotland and Iceland, which the Norsemen reached around 60 years later, making them presumably the first humans in history to step foot on the island. Iceland became an important settlement for fishing and whaling for Norse sailors upon seeing the bounty of the Atlantic Ocean, and it was actually a Norwegian sailor, Gunnbjorn Olfsson, who was the first European to discover the island of Greenland, and Eric the Red, who is famously the father of Leif Erikson, founded the first Nordic settlement in the year 982 AD on the southern tip of the island, meaning that they were on the opposite side of the island from the Dorset people in the north, and thus they initially believed the island to be completely uninhabited. Settlers from Norway and Iceland accompanied Leif Erikson, who established communities split into eastern, middle, and western settlements, and at the height of their population, these numbered around 5,000 people. The Norse Greenlanders would be annexed by the Norwegian Empire, and later by the Danish, being a part of the Kalmar Union in the 14th century, along with Iceland, Sweden, and Finland. The settlement soon became isolated from the rest of the Nordic world, with the Norse Greenlandic language evolving in a similar fashion to Icelandic or Faroese, which are similar to, albeit slightly divergent from, the Scandinavian languages on the mainland of Europe like Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish. Fascinatingly, Greenland was not the furthest extent of European exploration, with Ericsson also reaching the mainland of North America in 1000 AD, 500 years before Christopher Columbus, and this was given the name Vinland by the explorers. The extent of exploration of Vinland included Labrador, the island of Newfoundland, and New Brunswick, with there being only one recorded settlement in northern Newfoundland. It's entirely possible that Norse exploration and settlement extended even further south, but as of yet, no conclusive evidence has yet to be discovered and verified. Chaos began to brew in the late 14th and 15th centuries when global temperatures began dropping drastically, and the settlements in Greenland found that their crops produced less and less yield every year, and with virtually nothing to hunt on land other than the occasional polar bear or caribou, the Norsemen turned to the seas, with studies showing that the last diets of the settlers consisted almost entirely of fish and whale meat. The settlers gradually began to starve and freeze to death, seeing how they were not afforded the luxury of living on a lush volcanic island such as Iceland, and the population dwindled in a matter of decades, with settlers starting to panic, and records show that in some villages, all of the elderly were slaughtered and dumped during the winters to preserve food. Yeah, pretty dark, I know. Freezing temperatures completely cut off Greenland from the rest of the Norse colonies, and trade and contact was completely halted soon thereafter. Ironically, the last of the Norse in Greenland had perished only a matter of decades before Columbus's first voyage, and the age of exploration and European colonization commenced, with the entirety of the North and South American continents being completely colonized by the Europeans in only a couple of centuries. Before the Norse died out, though, it is known that they did establish contact with the Inuit peoples, who had started settling Greenland by the 13th century, replacing the Dorset peoples that had previously inhabited the island, and the Inuits migrated south, encountering the Norse, who gave them the name Skraeling, which means foreigner, and the Inuits named the Europeans Kavdlunate, which literally also means foreigner. The Norse presence in Greenland would be re-established 300 years later when Danish King Christian IV sent out expeditions to Greenland to see what happened to the Norse Greenlandic villages, and their fate was later revealed in 1721 by Norse missionary Hans Egede, which would reignite the Danish colonial endeavors in the region. Small numbers of colonists from Norway, Iceland, and Denmark became established in southern Greenland, often settling in and marrying into Inuit villages, teaching the Danish language, and spreading Danish Lutheranism. Today, around 80 to 90% of Greenland's population has Inuit heritage, although there are countless Greenlanders of mixed descent, such as former Greenlandic Prime Minister Kuupik Kleist, and most Greenlandic Inuits have a Norse surname, but retain a traditional Inuit given name. There's still a mid-sized Norse minority in Greenland, with a handful being descended from families living on the island for centuries, but most are immigrants from Denmark, or descended from much more recent arrivals from Scandinavia. There are also handfuls of Canadians and Americans, mostly at Thule Air Base in northern Greenland, along with a small but growing population of immigrants from China, Thailand, and the Philippines, similar to Iceland and the Faroe Islands, with the latter also still being a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Now, even though Inuits make up the majority of the population, genetic studies reveal that because of the small population, over 3/4 of all Greenlandic Inuits have at least some European ancestry, with an average European admixture of 25%, with those in urban areas having more than those in the far north or in small villages. Almost all of this admixture can be attributed to the Norse missionaries, sailors, and whalers that settled on the island and intermarried with the native population, which started after the fall of the Norse Greenlanders. Although it is known for a fact that the early Norse of the 14th century and the Inuits were very much aware of each other and occasionally traded, it is possible that some of the blood of those ancient Greenlandic Vikings could live on in the modern Inuits from sparse intermixing, although no conclusive evidence has come out in support of this theory, and further tests will need to be conducted to know definitively. Thus concludes the saga of the Vikings in North America. From Norwegian explorers to the Greenlandic villagers of today, the Norse presence on the island will always live on, and it would certainly be interesting to postulate what the world would look like if the Norse Greenlanders never died off, but that's a topic for a different video. Go ahead and let me know your thoughts on the Vikings, the ancient Norse explorers, and the people of Greenland today. Oh, and to my one subscriber that's actually from Greenland, dude, you are a freaking legend. Don't get too cold up there. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone. This has been Mason, and I'll see you next time.